Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon in English study group where we study the words of the Buddha. We're in volume 11, which is titled The Realms of Existence. We're going to be exploring chapters 141 through 148. This is the end of this book, where next week we're going to be moving into volume 12, which is titled Lowly Arts. So we're going to be starting that book next week. But here we just got 8 chapters to finish up this book, which we've been studying for many months now. And there's some chapters here that are all dealing with various things about how to get to enlightenment, where the bulk of this book is all about the 5 realms of existence. There's things at the beginning and things towards the end that are helping students to be able to understand the path to enlightenment. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly, and I'd like to invite you to participate in our Pali Canon in English study group. The way that we do this particular program, which is different than the other ones that I do, is I invite people in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read a chapter from the book. And these chapters are actually quite short. This first one is only basically a page. And then after a student reads the chapter, I'm going to then share some teachings on that. Then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you guys have related to that chapter. You can ask questions by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section. I'll be able to see that and answer your question. Or you can raise your hand electronically and then unmute your microphone and ask any and all questions that you like that way. So is there someone in Zoom who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter, chapter 141? Okay, looks like we have Vibhav and Samantha. So looks like we'll go to Vibhav first and then Samantha for the next one.
Remember me, Brahman, as awake, a Buddha. Could you be a heavenly being, sir? I will not be a heavenly being, Brahman. Could you be a Gandhabba, sir? I will not be a Gandhabba, Brahman. Could you be a Yakka, sir? I will not be a Yakka, Brahman. Could you be a human being, sir? I will not be a human being, Brahman. What then could you be, sir? Brahmin, I have abandoned those things, fetters, because of which I might have become a heavenly being. I have cut them off the root, made them like palm stumps, obliterated them so that they are no longer subject to future arising. I have abandoned those things, fetters, because of which I might have become a Gandhabba, might have become a Yakka, might have become a human being. I have cut them off the root, cut them off at the root, made them like palm stumps, obliterated them so that they are no longer subject to future arising. Just as a blue, red, or white lotus flower, though born in the water and grown up in the water, rises above the water and stands unsoiled by the water, even so, though born in the world and grown up in the world, have overcome the world and reside unsoiled by the world. Remember me, Brahman, as awake, a Buddha. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here, this is a discourse where, or at least a documentation, a situation that the Buddha encountered a Brahmin. If you remember, a Brahmin is essentially like a Hindu priest, that these individuals were doing rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, prayer, things like this for a fee for other people. And it was thought at that time that if you came to these individuals and they did one of these services for you, that your life was going to get better. But of course, that wasn't true, and the Buddha taught that this wasn't the way that your life was truly going to get better through rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, and prayer. So the Buddha was teaching how to become awake and train the mind to get to this enlightened mental state. And these Brahmin oftentimes would learn with the Buddha, because while they were doing rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, and prayer, they also would teach a little bit of moral conduct in some situations. So the Brahmin and the Buddha would sometimes come together, and this particular Brahmin is coming to the Buddha and observing him and seeing him and asking him these questions. Could you be a heavenly being? In other words, in the future, future, could you become a heavenly being? And the Buddha says, I will not be a heavenly being, right? And then he goes through all these other ones, eventually getting to, could you be a human being, sir? And the Buddha says, I will not be a human being, right? And the reason why is because he's gotten to enlightenment. That's what he's talking about here, that he's trained his mind to eliminate the fetters or the pollutions or the taints. And because of that, the Buddha knew that he was enlightened and there will no longer be a future existence, that he won't become one of these beings that this Brahmin is asking him about, that he's obliterated these particular pollutions, made them like palm stumps, that they're no longer subject to future arising. This is really key because in your way and in your journey to enlightenment, as you're working to remove and eliminate the fetters, there's times where the fetters can actually go dormant. I've seen these go dormant for upwards of 6 months or so, and then they can arise again and you'll be surprised. So that's why it's important that you never convince yourself that any of these fetters are actually eliminated, that even when you don't see any symptoms of it for as long as 6 months, that you don't actually convince yourself that the fetter is actually eliminated. And just stay diligent and dedicated so that you eventually get to the point where it's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and you haven't seen the arising of that particular fetter. And then you'll know that it's no longer subject to future arising because there's no longer any symptoms related to that particular fetter. And then ultimately what the Buddha gets to is this analogy about the lotus. This is where lotus flowers are oftentimes used in Buddhist culture and Buddhist artwork and places like this, because a lotus flower symbolizes your journey to enlightenment, where the roots of the lotus are growing deep down into the earth and holding on to the earth. Then there needs to be this strong stalk that grows through the murky water, and the lotus flower blooms above the water. So an individual on the path to enlightenment in the unenlightened state is holding on to the world and worldly possessions really tightly. And now it needs to grow this strong practice through the wisdom of the teachings of the Buddha to go through the murkiness of the world, because the world has killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, substances that cause heedlessness, and you're going to need the wisdom to know how to rise above that. And as you do, then you bloom into a lotus flower in attaining enlightenment. So the Buddha here is saying, just like a lotus flower is born in the water, it is unsoiled by that water, right? That the lotus flower is able to rise above that. An individual who is in the world and has been born, their mind as they're growing up is being soiled. It's being conditioned by the world. That when we grow up in our day-to-day life, we experience certain things growing up with the adults around us, and we adopt that way of thinking without realizing it because we're a young child and we don't know any better. So we just adopt the thinking of the people around us. So if we grew up in a household where there's maybe yelling and arguing and fights and hostility and bitterness, and that's the way disagreements were dealt with, then we grow up seeing that, and our mind's conditioned to think that that's the way to deal with these things. So as we age and we encounter certain disagreements, we might be bitter and harsh and hostile to the people around us because the mind is soiled by the world. But by the time you get to enlightenment and you've purified your mind is no longer soiled by the world. And that's what the Buddha is saying here, is that although he was born in the world and he grew up in the world, he has overcome the world, meaning he has purified his mind, and his mind is no longer conditioned or soiled by the world, that his mind resides unsoiled by the world. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is no longer conditioned. It no longer has these pollutions of the mind. It's no longer soiled. It is unsoiled or unconditioned. So ultimately, the Buddha says to this Brahmin to remember him as being awake. Because a Brahmin coming in contact with an enlightened being, here a Buddha would do things very differently than the average person. An enlightened being would do things very differently than an unenlightened being. So for example, like say a person who's on the path to enlightenment or someone who is enlightened goes to a funeral. All the other people in the funeral might actually be crying and grieving and sorrowful, sad and things like this, where a person who's trained their mind well, surely an enlightened being, they're not going to be crying and sobbing at a funeral. their mind's going to be completely stable and steady. They even might have a smile on their face and be joyful and pleased. They're not joyful because the person died. They're joyful despite this person has died. So oftentimes when an enlightened being is coming in contact with other beings who are not on the path or unenlightened, they can be looking at what an enlightened being is doing, and it can be very odd for them. Because if you were at a funeral not crying and not sobbing and not grieving, the other people, they might say, this person didn't love mom, or this person didn't love grandma or grandpa. But that's because of their own lack of wisdom to understand that that's not what's causing their grief and sadness and sorrow. What's causing that grief, sadness, and sorrow is the mind's craving, desire, attachment, holding on to the world so tightly, wanting things to be permanent. But this individual who's training their mind or has trained their mind is enlightened, their mind's not craving permanence. They can have love and appreciation and gratitude for this person who's died without experiencing any grief or sadness or sorrow. And an individual who's unenlightened and who's not on the path, like a Brahmin, wouldn't be able to understand that because they wouldn't understand what the enlightened mind is and what it's experiencing as it's being trained. So while there's no indication of that kind of thing here in this recounting of what happened, you can understand that a Brahmin looking at a Buddha or an enlightened being could be like, this is really odd. What's this individual doing? Maybe just being so calm and peaceful and joyful. Like, why is this person, functioning this way? This individual might have difficulties to understand that. So they might have become curious and started asking the Buddha various questions about him and his life. And now this is an opportunity for them to learn and understand more about this path, perhaps. So you're going to be in experiences where you're functioning in the world very differently than the people around you. And you need to be able to understand that what you're experiencing is normal. That's normal for an enlightened being. It's abnormal to go around and be upset and angry and frustrated every time there's the slightest bit of impermanence. Now, this is normal for an unenlightened being, but we need to be able to see that as abnormal, meaning that's not what you would ultimately like to be experiencing on a day-to-day basis. While everybody else in the world might be thinking that is normal, you can understand that that's not what your normal could be. If you train your mind and you become unsoiled by the world, you can get to the point where when someone dies, for example, it doesn't feel like the carpet has been pulled out from under your legs or you've been chopped off at the knees. You can just reside peaceful and joyful despite the fact that this individual has died. So this is just a little bit more information to help you understand how other beings who aren't on the path to enlightenment might have questions of you and might be curious about what it is that you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And here the Buddha had an opportunity to be able to help this individual just a little bit to understand, that he is not going to be a future being in the world because he's purified his mind and he's now unsoiled by the world. His mind is purified. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. This is chapter 141. Remember me, Brahmin, as awake or as a Buddha. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. I know this chapter is mostly about, what a Buddha is, which we've been through many times. But there was one sentence in your explanation that I hadn't really seen before, and it says, a Buddha will need to weave their way through a previous Buddha's teaching as all things are affected by impermanence. So as a student, I have to admit, I don't read any of the Pali Canon. I really just trust that you're sharing with us what we need to know. In a way that seems a little bit lazy, but also I feel like if I were, not that I'm a Buddha and need to weave my way through another Buddha's teaching, but as a student, is it important for us to go and read the Pali Canon, or more just to trust that you've hit the highlights? Because I feel like I would get overwhelmed if I tried to do more than I already am as far as studying.
Yeah, you are reading the Pali Canon. You're reading excerpts of it. So as you know, the Pali Canon is in those 45 volumes of books.
Right.
And what these books do is they extract the most important teachings. And I know with 100% confidence that these books contain the discourses that you need in order to be able to make your way to enlightenment. And you'll be able to gain that confidence too as you study them and you see the improvement to the condition of your mind, and you're able to independently verify the teachings themselves, and you see improvement in your relationships and things like this. You'll know that what you're learning and what you're studying is leading you to enlightenment, and this is the true teachings, and this is from the Pali Canon. Whether you choose to go read other teachings as part of the Pali Canon is up to you. What you're typically going to see, though, is you're going to see translations that aren't ideal. You'll see people that are translating the words of the Buddha in a way that don't really represent the way that an enlightened being speaks or the way that a Buddha speaks. And this can actually be confusing for someone. And you can also see words that are being used like desire and things like this that is being used in a positive. So it can sometimes be confusing. So early on, when someone's first starting to learn, I don't advise them to learn in the Pali Canon at all, because those other translations can be very confusing for them. And sometimes people have already been studying the Pali Canon before they ever spend time learning with me, and they oftentimes spend a lot of time sorting out their confusion of what they've learned with these other resources before they're making their way into learning with me. So if that's the case, then that's the case. I will help them with that. A brand new student starting to learn, I don't advise them to learn outside of the resources I share for several years. But you guys that are studying with me here, most of you have been studying for a certain period of time. If you've got your arms around what I'm sharing and what's in these books, if you decide to go explore what you see in the Pali Canon, you could. You wouldn't have to, you wouldn't need to, but you could. And that's one of the reasons why I put these references here, so that you guys know where I got these and that you can build that confidence that what's being shared with you is the words of the Buddha. But what I've done in this book series is I've laid it out in such a way that gradually builds on itself and helps you to learn it at an appropriate time that is needed for the mind to grow on the path to enlightenment. And as you gain that confidence to see that it's working, you may just be completely fine with learning what you learn here. But if you'd ever like to go look at those other resources like the Pali Canon itself, just keep in mind that I would wait for a few years until you feel like you've got your arms around this, and then realize that when you're reading those other translations, there can be words and ways that people are representing the words of the Buddha that is opposite of the way an enlightened being actually speaks and the way that a Buddha speaks and what you've actually learned. And sometimes what students do in those situations is they will send me the reference to the discourses that they're reading, and they will sometimes ask me, like, David, can you help me understand this discourse because I'm not understanding it? And then I will modify a few words and kind of update the language a bit and then send it back to them, and then they're like, oh, okay, I got it now. I understand what the Buddha is teaching here. Because it's really challenging for an unenlightened mind to translate the words of a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha, because that unenlightened mind is dealing with all kinds of pollutions. And when they look at the Pali language, they're translating it in a way that doesn't actually represent what the Buddha taught, because this language of Pali is no longer a spoken language today. So even the English language, translating it into an active language like Spanish or Hindi or Arabic or something like that, these are active languages that exist today, and there would be differences in how people translate these languages today. But this language that is no longer used, this Pali language that is not a spoken language, there's many different perspectives of what specific words mean. And when you're looking at that through an unenlightened mind with pollutions, an individual might come up with words that don't actually really represent what the Buddha was actually saying. So for example, you can see some places where the Buddha is quoted as saying, "You stupid fool," right? Well, I can assure you, an enlightened being, and surely a Buddha, never refers to anybody as a stupid fool. Because if that was the case, their mind's not enlightened. An individual who's enlightened, and surely a Buddha, doesn't talk in degrading and diminishing ways towards others. But this unenlightened being who's translating these words, thinking that they understand the Pali language, they might translate it that way. And now if you as an individual, as a student, reads that, your mind can be conditioned to think that that's how an enlightened being, how a Buddha speaks, and now you might actually start speaking that way too. So if you decide to go out and read other parts of the Pali Canon, that's a choice for you to make. But if you encounter anything that is confusing for you, or challenged with, you're always welcome to send it to me and I'll help you to understand it. But you wouldn't have to do that. But if you do choose to do it, just know that you have the ability to get help with that.
Okay, thank you. I do have confidence in your teachings. I was just wondering if I needed to do extra homework. I have actually gone back, and I still have books that I was reading when I was in the States that had me confused, or I wasn't quite getting, what exactly Buddhism was. And now that I've read your wording compared to what I was reading in those other books, it's become very clear to me why I was so confused before. So that's progress, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And that confusion that one experiences, that's another word for the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, or that misunderstanding, misperception. That's the whole thing that an individual is working to improve, right? That's the whole goal of getting to enlightenment, is cultivating wisdom. So if an individual introduces translations that are producing confusion, then the individual is actually walking in the opposite direction of enlightenment, because they're becoming more confused rather than more awake with more wisdom. So that's why early on, I definitely encourage people not to study other translations. And if someone has been studying other translations, I encourage them to set those aside and learn through this. They're going to make so much more progress that way. So it's great that you have confidence in what you're learning. If you ever feel like you need some other teaching, you can look at that. But there's nothing else that I would say that an individual would need, because these books and these resources is what led to the mental state that I'm experiencing now. And if that's what it took that led to the mental state I'm experiencing, then if you're interested in experiencing this same thing that I'm experiencing, then this is the collection of teachings that is going to do that for you. And you wouldn't need to learn anything outside of that. But someone could surely do that if they were interested.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have anything anywhere else. Okay, I don't see anything anywhere else. Samantha, would you like to read this next one?
Sure.
Okay, this is chapter 142.
The 8 kinds of assemblies. Ananda, these 8 kinds of assemblies, what are they? They are the assembly of Katyas, the assembly of Brahmins, the assembly of householders, the assembly of ascetics, the assembly of heavenly beings of the realm of the 4 kings, the assembly of 33 gods, the assembly of Maras, and the assembly of Brahmas. I remember well, Ananda, many hundreds of assemblies of Katyas, of Brahmins, of householders, of ascetics, of heavenly beings of the realm of the 4 kings, of the 33 gods, of Maras, of Brahmas that I have attended. And before I sat down with them, spoke to them, or joined in their conversation, I adopted their appearance and speech, whatever it might be. And I instructed, inspired, fired, and delighted them with the discourse on the teachings. And as I spoke with them, they did not know me and wondered, who is it that speaks like this, a heavenly being or a man? And having thus instructed them, I disappeared, and still they did not know. He who has just disappeared, was he a heavenly being or a man?
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So the previous discourse and this discourse helps you to understand that the Buddha was a human being. We know that, right? But there's a lot of places in the world that think about the Buddha like a god or a heavenly being or something of this nature. But you can see from the previous discourse and through all of his other discourses, and just knowing that a human being comes into the world through the womb of a woman, through the womb of another human being. A god isn't born through the womb of a human being, right? So we can know that the Buddha was indeed a human being, and he became enlightened where his mind was completely purified, and then he became a teacher where he was sharing the teachings with others of how to get to that enlightened mental state. Here he goes through these different communities or different assemblies, and he wasn't part of any of these assemblies other than this assembly of ascetics, right? He was part of that group. But, these other groups, he wasn't part of them. So we know that the Buddha was not a god. He wasn't a heavenly being. He was a human being. And a discourse like this doesn't really give you anything, super tangible that's going to eliminate your discontentedness today. But at least you can understand that the Buddha didn't see himself as a god or as a heavenly being or as a Mara. He wasn't any of these things. So no matter what other people think about what the Buddha was, you can know the truth that he was indeed a human being. He was a teacher. He shared teachings with others of how to actually get to that enlightened mental state. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Chris has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm just curious why Maras and Brahmas is used in the plural here.
Because the Buddha talks about Mara as dying and being reborn in different beings, right? Becoming a different being, but it's the same entity, but as different individuals. And he talks about the same thing as Brahman or God as well. He talks about it as becoming multiple beings. And there were multiple gods during the lifetime of the Buddha. So that's why they refer to it here in the plural. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions. Don't see any others. So let's go to the next one, which is chapter 143. We're not going to actually read this one because it's really long. I'll just explain to you how to approach a discourse like this and how you can use it. But we're not going to actually read it because it does just take a really long time to actually read it. This is titled The Marks of a Great Man, 32 Marks of a Buddha. And someone had asked the Buddha previous to this about why he looked the way that he did. During the lifetime of the Buddha, it was known that people considered him to be a handsome individual. For a human being, he was considered to be handsome. And people were curious of why he looked the way that he did in terms of the body. And he went through this particular discourse where he was explaining every single aspect of his body and why his body appears in this way. And he was, in most cases, relating it to things from his previous lives and things that he had done in his previous life that had led to his appearance looking the way that he did in this particular life. So the way that you use a discourse like this is that you look at the wholesome qualities that he's talking about, that he practiced, and then you practice those wholesome qualities. Not because you're trying to look like the Buddha or that, that if you don't have these qualities now, that somehow you're lesser of a being or anything like that. It's just that he's saying, hey, these legs that you're looking at, this is the reason why these legs look this way, or these arms or these shoulders or chest or whatever it is. He's just explaining through the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, of what led to him appearing in this way and looking in this way. So let's go through just some of this, and I'll show you what I mean by this, that we can talk about how you can use a discourse like this. So here we go. Monks, in whatever former life, the Tathagata became a donor of fine food, delicious and tasty, hard and soft, and of drinks. By performing that wholesome karma, he was reborn in a heavenly world, falling away from there and being reborn here on earth. He acquired this mark of a great man, the 7 cord-vexed surfaces on both hands, both feet, both shoulders, and his trunk. Right? So he's explaining that it was because of him practicing this generosity in a previous life and then ultimately being reborn in the heavenly world and then leaving from the heavenly world and being reborn into the human world that he now has these physical appearances. This is the 16th mark, right, out of the 32. So here, what he's teaching you is that generosity is a wholesome quality, and you would like to practice generosity, and you understand that practicing generosity leads to training the mind to let go and eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness. And now we can look at these other ones. Monks, in whatever former life, the Tathagata made himself beloved through the 4 bases of compassion: generosity, pleasing speech, beneficent conduct, and impartiality. Right? This is what he talks about, what is needed in order to have successful relationships. He talks about giving, endearing speech, good, wholesome moral conduct, and equality, and looking at yourself as being equal among all beings. So these are the 4 qualities that you would be wise to practice in all your relationships, where you're regularly practicing generosity, where you have right speech or endearing speech or pleasing speech, where you have good, wholesome moral conduct in terms of your bodily actions and your livelihood, and then impartiality or equality, that you see yourself as equal, that you don't put yourself above or below other people. So in practicing those qualities, that's what's going to that is going to help you get to enlightenment, right? That's what's going to help you to have harmonious relationships. So the Buddha is saying that these are qualities that led to him, when he returned to earth, to acquire soft and tender hands and feet and a net-like hands and feet. right? So this is why he has these particular physical qualities. Not that you're interested in necessarily having these same exact things, because that might not be the situation for this body in this life, and that's okay. But what you would like to be able to practice is these 4 bases of compassion that he's talking about here. That's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. So you can go through a discourse like this, and whether you relate it to the physical qualities that the Buddha had at the time or not is up to you. But you can pull out and extract these wholesome qualities that he's talking about that he practiced in previous lives. And that's what you would like to practice in this life, because those are the qualities that led ultimately to his mind improving so that he could actually get to enlightenment on his own as a Buddha. And those are the same things that are going to lead to your enlightenment in this life as well. Also, I'll point out that the artwork that you always see me using of the Buddha sitting with his robe on and a shaved head, and how I'll share with you that the statues that we see don't truly represent and depict the way that the Buddha appeared during his life. The reason why I share that with you is that that particular artwork is the way that the Buddha looked during his lifetime. The individual who created that artwork looked through this discourse, and they created that artwork based on this discourse. Where the people who first started making statues about 500 to 600 years after the death of the Buddha, they didn't necessarily look at this discourse because they depicted him with a crown on his head, wearing really fancy and elaborate clothing and things of this nature. So if you're curious of what the Buddha actually looked like, you wouldn't look to the statues that you see that are very ornate and very flashy with him wearing, exuberant clothing, but you would look to a discourse like this where he's actually explaining what he truly actually looks like. But just like now, 500 to 600 years after the death of the Buddha, not everybody studied his original teachings. They might have been, kind of learning some of the things that he taught, but they didn't go back to his original words. So when they were creating statues of him, they weren't necessarily aware of this discourse. But you can be aware of this discourse. Then you'll have confidence of how the Buddha looked and appeared, and he didn't walk around with a crown on his head, because a individual who's gotten to enlightenment, and surely a Buddha, they wouldn't see themselves as being above other people. They would just see themselves as an equal to everybody else. And wearing those really fancy, elaborate clothing would, kind of distinguish somebody as being potentially above other people. So this is helping you to be able to see true reality of what he actually looked like during his lifetime. And you can extrapolate the wholesome qualities that he practiced in his previous lives, because you would like to practice those qualities now in this life. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. I understand that, as you've just explained, that there are certain behaviors that we should have to perhaps lead to the physical characteristics that the Buddha had. I'm just wondering if this particular chapter is indicative of what every Buddha might look like, or was it more of a, this is the way I look and why? Would each Buddha look different because of what they've been through in previous lifetimes, or was this more of a teaching discourse as far as, kind of teaching about, well, I did this and so I look like this?
Yeah, it's the latter, that not every Buddha is going to look like this, because if they did, that would be permanence, right? Not every Buddha is going to look the same. But an individual's body and how it appears, it's based on previous decisions that are made in previous lives, but it's also based in decisions that are made in this life too. There's certain decisions we make in this life that lead to the appearance of how we appear, particularly as we age, that, depending on the decisions that we've made, there's certain appearance that we experience because of that. But ultimately, what you would like to be able to get to is the mental qualities that the Buddha is practicing. But you shouldn't take this discourse as every Buddha will look this way, because there aren't any physical characteristics that distinguish a Buddha as being a Buddha. It's about those 3 qualities that you read in the previous chapter.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So you guys can read this on your own. You're welcome to get the books and be able to see. As you see, it's very long, so reading through it would take quite a while to read through it. So is there someone who's interested in reading chapter 144? Okay, looks like Samantha and Vibhav again. Go ahead, Samantha.
Benefits for one's confidence in the Tathagata. 1,000 times the world in which the sun and moon revolve and light up the quarters with their brightness is called a 1,000-fold minor world system. In that 1,000-world system, there are 1,000 moons, 1,000 suns, 1,000 Cineris king of mountains, 1,000 Jambudipas, 1,000 Apagoyanas, 1,000 Uttara Kuras, 1,000 Puba Vedahas, and 1,000 four great oceans, 1,000 four great kings, 1,000 heavens of heavenly beings ruled by the four great kings, 1,000 Tavat Timsa, 1,000 Yama, 1,000 Tusita, 1,000 of heavenly beings who excite in creation, 1,000 of heavenly beings who control what is created by others, 1,000 Brahma worlds. A world that is 1,000 times 1,000-fold minor world system is called 1,000 to the second power middling world system. A world that is 1,000 times 1,000 to the second power middling world system is called 1,000 to the third power great world system. Ananda, the Tathagata can convey his voice as far as he would like in 1,000 to the third power great world system. But in what way, Venerable Sir, can the Tathagata convey his voice as far as he would like in 1,000 to the third power great world system? Here Ananda, the Tathagata fills with his radiance 1,000 to the third power great world system. When those beings perceive that light, then the Tathagata projects his voice and makes them hear its sound. It is in such a way, Ananda, that the Tathagata can convey his voice as far as he would like in 1,000 to the third power great world system. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda said to the perfectly enlightened one, "It is my good fortune. I am fortunate that my teacher is so powerful and mighty." When this was said, the Venerable Udayi said to the Venerable Ananda, "What is it to you, friend Ananda, that your teacher is so powerful and mighty?" When this was said, the perfectly enlightened one said to the Venerable Udayi, "Do not say so, Udayi. Do not say so, Udayi. Udayi, if Ananda were to die without being free of craving, then because of his confidence, he would exercise heavenly kingship among the heavenly beings 7 times, and great kingship in this Jambudipa, one of the great continents, 7 times. However, in this very life, Ananda will attain final nibbana."
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So here, what is being shared is that when a Buddha teaches, those words, those teachings are essentially going to shine in the world. You can see that in other parts of the Buddhist teachings where he talks about when a Buddha is in existence, the teachings that it takes to get to enlightenment are going to shine in the world very brightly so that many people can understand them in the world, but then also there's the ability for beings in the heavenly world to be able to understand those teachings as well. So that's what essentially is being talked about here. But then ultimately what the Buddha gets to down here is where he talks about how Ananda is going to attain enlightenment in that particular life. A Buddha understands and is able to determine whether someone is actually going to attain enlightenment or not in this particular life. This is something that a Buddha has the ability to be able to do, is as their students are learning with them, they're able to determine in large part that their students are going to attain enlightenment or not. But they don't necessarily tell them that while they're learning and growing and developing on the path. But in this particular case, the Buddha said, hey, Ananda is going to get to enlightenment in this very life. And that's actually what actually occurred, that after the Buddha died, shortly thereafter, within 3 to 6 months, Ananda actually did get to enlightenment. He never got to enlightenment during the lifetime of the Buddha. Pretty clear from the discourses that Ananda was attached to the Buddha, because when the Buddha announced 3 months prior to dying that he was going to be dying and giving his students a heads up, Ananda was begging and pleading with him not to die. So this is the mind being attached, that he was begging and pleading with the Buddha not to die. So I suspect that that's the reason why he never attained enlightenment during the lifetime of the Buddha, is because he was attached to the Buddha. He is known as being the student who was with the Buddha the longest and the most, from essentially the time where the Buddha first started teaching all the way until his death, which was 45 years. So his mind ended up getting attached to the Buddha, and he wasn't able to eliminate that attachment until the Buddha actually died, which is the case in some situations. You might actually experience this yourself. You can eliminate an attachment to somebody while they're still alive. There's a process and tools and techniques to be able to help your mind to be able to do that. And that's what you would like to be able to do in order to get to a point where you can experience enlightenment sooner rather than later. But there might be some attachments, some people in your life that you aren't able to actually eliminate your attachment until they actually die. Because when they die, that's like the impermanence that you're experiencing that the mind now needs to actually let go. And that's what happened in the case of Ananda with the Buddha. So he attained enlightenment shortly after the death of the Buddha. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions. Vibhav, is this a question, or you'd like to read the next one? Maybe both.
Yeah, I guess the question is how the world system to describe is kind of very like saying that there's a thousandfold minor world system, and then there's 1,000 to the second power middling world, and 1,000 to the third power great world with many continents and stuff like. Can you just maybe explain the reasoning behind describing this way?
Yeah, 2,500 years ago, they would think of the world and describe the world differently than we do now, because throughout those 2,500 years, our understanding of the world has evolved. So I think this discourse, I can't remember, no, it doesn't say it here, but in other discourses, you can see where the Buddha is talking about the 4 great oceans, where we think about 5 oceans nowadays. You can see where he's talking about the continents, and he's talking about a different number of continents than what we understand today. Oh, here it is, the 4 great oceans. He's talking about the 4 great oceans, right? But when he talks about continents, he talks about a different number. So the same thing in the way that they're talking about, 1,000 to the second power and things like this. This isn't the way that we refer to these things now. That's just the way that they talked about them back then, and they understood what that meant. But you don't need to understand that in order to be able to get to enlightenment. Just understand they're explaining the world in the way that they understood it at that time, and we understand the world in a different way in terms of the number of continents or the number of oceans or these different realms, how we've talked about throughout this book, how they subcategorized the heavenly realm in the hell realm, where we don't need to understand it to that level of detail to actually understand the world around us and get to enlightenment. So it's just a different way to explain things, and because of impermanence, things have changed since then in terms of the way that human beings think of the world.
Okay, also the way the Tathagata can convey his voice as far by projecting his radiance and things like that are kind of, it's very, it's not in most other discourses, it seems very specific here. How can reach other world systems?
What this is that beings in the other realms can hear and understand the words of a Buddha to be able to learn and grow and develop and make their way towards enlightenment. That's what this is basically depicting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, so there's this next chapter, 145. Is there someone who would like to read this?
I can read it if nobody else is reading.
Okay.
Maybe Robert can go ahead.
Sure, yeah, Robert's volunteering. Go ahead, sir.
Sure. Recipient and the fruit of such gift. Here, Ananda, by giving a gift to an animal, the offering may be predicted to repay 100-fold. By giving a gift to an unwholesome, ordinary person, the offering may be predicted to repay 1,000-fold. By giving a gift to a virtuous, practicing moral conduct, ordinary person, the offering may be predicted to repay 100,000-fold. By giving a gift to one outside the community who is free from craving for sensual pleasures, the offering may be predicted to repay 100,000 times 100,000-fold. By giving a gift to one who has entered upon the way to the realization of the fruit of stream entry, the offering may be predicted to repay incalculably, immeasurably. What then should be said about giving a gift to a stream enterer? What should be said about giving a gift to one who has entered upon the way to the realization of the fruit of a once returner, to a once returner, to one who has entered upon the way to the realization of the fruit of non-returner, to a non-returner, to one who has entered upon the way to the realization of the fruit of arahantship, to an arahant, to a Pacceka Buddha. What should be said about giving a gift to a Tathagata, accomplished and fully perfectly enlightened? There are 7 kinds of offerings made to the community, Ananda. One gives a gift to a community of both male and female ordained practitioners headed by the Buddha. This is the first kind of offering made to the community. One gives a gift to the community of both male and female ordained practitioners after the Tathagata has attained final nibbana, final enlightenment. This is the second kind of offering made to the community. One gives a gift to the community of male ordained practitioners. This is the third kind of offering made to the community. One gives a gift to the community of female ordained practitioners. This is the fourth kind of offering made to the community. One gives a gift saying, appoint so many male and female ordained practitioners for me from the community. This is the fifth kind of offering made to the community. One gives a gift saying, appoint so many male ordained practitioners for me from the community. This is the sixth kind of offering made to the community. One gives a gift saying, appoint so many female ordained practitioners for me from the community. This is the seventh kind of offering made to the community. In future times, Ananda, there will be members of the clan who are yellow necks, immoral, of unwholesome character. People will give gifts to these unwholesome persons for the sake of the community. Even then, I say, an offering made to the community is incalculable, immeasurable, and I say that in no way is a gift to a person individually ever more fruitful than an offering made to the community. There are, Ananda, 4 kinds of purification of offering. What 4? There is the offering that is purified by the donor, not by the recipient. There is the offering that is purified by the recipient, not by the donor. There is the offering that is purified neither by the donor nor by the recipient. There is the offering that is purified both by the donor and by the recipient. And how is the offering purified by the donor, not by the recipient? Here the donor is virtuous, practicing moral conduct, of wholesome character, and the recipient is immoral, of unwholesome character. Thus the offering is purified by the donor, not by the recipient. And how is the offering purified by the recipient, not by the donor? Here the donor is immoral, of unwholesome character, and the recipient is virtuous, of wholesome character. Thus the offering is purified by the recipient, not by the donor. And how is the offering purified neither by the donor nor by the recipient? Here the donor is immoral, of unwholesome character, and the recipient is immoral, of unwholesome character. Thus the offering is purified neither by the donor nor by the recipient. And how is the offering purified by both by the donor and the recipient? Here the donor is virtuous, of wholesome character, and the recipient is virtuous, of wholesome character. Thus the offering is purified both by the donor and by the recipient. These are the 4 kinds of purification of offering. That is what the perfectly enlightened one said. When the fortunate one has said that, the teacher said further, when a virtuous person to an unwholesome person gives, with trusting heart, a gift righteously obtained, placing confidence that the fruit of action is great, the donor's virtue purifies the offering. When an unwholesome person to a virtuous person gives, with untrusting heart, a gift unrighteously obtained, nor places confidence that the fruit of action is great, the recipient's virtue purifies the offering. When an unwholesome person to an unwholesome person gives, with untrusting heart, a gift unrighteously obtained, nor places confidence that the fruit of action is great, neither's virtue purifies the offering. When a virtuous person to a virtuous person gives, with trusting heart, a gift righteously obtained, placing confidence that the fruit of action is great, that gift, I say, will come to full fruition. When a passionless person to a passionless person gives, with trusting heart, a gift righteously obtained, placing confidence that the fruit of action is great, that gift, I say, is the best of worldly gifts.
All right, thank you, sir. So, this discourse is about giving and practicing generosity. And the Buddha is going through different types of beings here that you would end up potentially making offerings to or practicing generosity with, and showing the increased level of benefit in that offering. So the first one that he starts out with is making a gift to an animal, right? Maybe you see a stray cat or a dog or a squirrel or something, and maybe you give them some food. There's benefit there because you're training your mind to let go. You're practicing generosity, but it's not to the same level as practicing with these other beings. And it's not because an animal is less of a being. It's just that that animal isn't able to get to enlightenment in that life. So it's going to need to be reborn into a future life anyway to be able to get to enlightenment. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't potentially practice that generosity or that it would be unwise to do so. It's just not producing the same level of benefit as the Buddha ultimately gets to. What the Buddha ultimately gets to is how practicing generosity with a member of the community is going to produce a lot more benefit, because essentially you're coming together with an individual where you can cultivate wisdom. So he goes through these various individuals that you might end up practicing generosity with. And the highest number that they had available to them 2,500 years ago was the 100,000th place. They weren't able to count higher than that because the number 1 million didn't actually exist. So that's why the Buddha is describing it this way: 100,000 times 100,000 fold, right? So this is related a little bit to the question that you asked previously, Vibhav, about how they describe things differently, because it's just what they had available to them at the time to be able to describe certain things. But ultimately what the Buddha starts talking about here is an individual who's gotten into the first stage of enlightenment, or any of the other stages of enlightenment, or enlightenment itself. That if you're coming in contact with this type of individual and practicing generosity, there's this immeasurable, incalculable amount of benefit that is actually being achieved, because you're supporting that individual to make their way towards enlightenment, but then also you're coming in contact with somebody that can help you gain wisdom of what it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. So that's the actual benefit in making an offering to someone who's in one of the 4 stages of enlightenment. And in order to be able to make that offering, you would actually need to know a bit about the path to enlightenment to even determine that someone is in one of the 4 stages of enlightenment. Early on, you don't necessarily know how to determine that for other people. And you're not interested in going around and judging who's in what stage of enlightenment. But if you're going to make a gift to somebody and you're going to practice generosity, you would like to make sure that it has the most impact and the most benefit. Whereas if you were giving a gift, say, to someone who was beating animals, who was using drugs and alcohol, who was doing immoral things with their moral conduct, that's what's going to happen with your generosity, that it's going to be used to support those things. They're going to use it to purchase drugs and alcohol, or they're going to use it for gambling or other things like this. But instead, if you're able to determine through your discernment or your wise decision making that somebody's practicing the teachings well, and that you would like to support this individual in their growth and development on the path to enlightenment, to then maybe even also be able to share teachings with others, that is going to produce a immeasurable, incalculable amount of benefit for you and for countless other people to be able to learn that wisdom. So because an individual's mind doesn't necessarily have the wisdom to determine who's in one of the 4 stages of enlightenment, particularly when they're first getting started, the Buddha in other discourses gives some very basic things to look at in order to determine this. He helps you to be able to understand that it would be wise to look at the quality of somebody's mind, that if they're muddle-minded, he says that they're not really practicing the teachings very closely, and it would be unwise to support that person because they haven't truly understood the teachings enough to be able to train their own mind and uproot the pollutions of their mind. Whereas if somebody's trained their mind very closely and they didn't have pollutions of their mind, or they had a minimal amount of pollution, their mind would be focused and concentrated. They'd have clarity of mind and deep memory. They'd be able to speak about the teachings with ease. So if you're encountering this type of person, the Buddha says that's the type of person that you would like to support and make your offerings to. And you can be assured that they're practicing the teachings to a certain degree, because that's how they were able to get to that focus and concentration and clarity, because they've uprooted some of the pollutions out of their mind. Of course, an arahant, an enlightened being, you would know that someone's enlightened because they're not experiencing anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. No matter what's going on around them, you'll see that their mind is stable and steady. It's unshakable no matter what's happening. So that's a way that you can, kind of look at some basic things to determine whether someone is potentially enlightened or not. And making a gift to that type of individual who's in one of the 4 stages of enlightenment or practicing for the realization of one of those 4 stages is going to be very helpful for you, because you're able to then gain wisdom of how to achieve that same state that their mind is experiencing. However we would like to pronounce this, a Pakya Buddha. What this is this is an individual who's gotten to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides, but they don't actually teach. They don't actually share what it took for them to get to that enlightened mental state. I've never met anybody like that, but apparently they exist. So that's why the Buddha is talking about this, that making an offering to that type of person would be beneficial, because once again, you're coming in contact with somebody that you could ask questions to. And then he talks about a Tathagata, or a fully perfectly enlightened one, that making an offering to this type of individual, if you lived during the lifetime of a Buddha, it would produce incalculable and immeasurable amount of benefit, because you're coming in contact with a fully perfectly enlightened one who would be able to share clearly how they were able to get to enlightenment. So this is very beneficial for one's generosity and practice of generosity. But then he goes on and talks about the 7 kinds of offerings made to the community. Because as you're making offerings to the community, this supports the teachings to be able to come into the world for countless people to be able to get access to them, including those individuals that we talked about previously. So he goes through male and female ordained practitioners here, talking about that, talking about some other things. And then ultimately he gets to this point where he talks about purification of the offering, where ideally the donor and the recipient would be conducting themselves with wholesome moral conduct. That's what you would ultimately like to be able to do, is get to the point where you yourself has cultivated the wisdom of how to practice wholesome moral conduct, but then you also have the ability to discern whether the recipient of your offering is practicing wholesome moral conduct as well. That's what he's talking about down here. And this will ensure that the offering has made and produced the most amount of benefit, that both are of a wholesome character. And then he just kind of summarizes that down here in a different way. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. This is about producing merit, practicing generosity, training your mind to let go, and producing benefit for yourself to cultivate wisdom, and for other people to be able to cultivate the wisdom as well. So Samantha, you have a question? Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, I have 2. First of all, what is purification of an offering? And the second one is, for the third example of purifying offerings where neither a donor nor a recipient purifies it, who does purify it?
Yeah, so purification of an offering, the way you can think about this is how to ensure the offering produces the most benefit, right? So if the donor has wholesome character and the recipient does not, there is benefit there, but it's not significant benefit, right? If the recipient has wholesome character, but the donor does not, there's benefit there, but it's not, a significant amount. Here, if neither are practicing wholesome moral conduct, they're both of unwholesome character, there's no benefit there other than the fact that the donor is training their mind to let go, right? And this practice of generosity is training the mind to let go. And ultimately, you would like to get to the point where both individuals are practicing wholesome moral conduct. So you can think of purification of an offering as how to ensure that this offering is going to produce the most amount of benefit.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's both of your questions, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, it looks like Vibhav, you have a question? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I have a question about the second one where the donor is impure and unwholesome and the recipient is wholesome. So, like, suppose a lot of drug money was offered and you knew that it was drug money, like somebody would come to you and say, okay, and they would know that there's like a mafia or a drug lord and then offer you large sums of money. I think that's kind of falls in probably into this one. Is that still, you would still accept it?
It would be unwise to accept a gift that you knew came from the harm of other beings. You would need to be able to know that with certainty. If there's rumors that somebody is, using your example, part of a mafia, and they sell drugs and, they're murdering people and things like this, and they're making an offering, if it's just rumors and people just kind of assume that this is the case, it doesn't mean that it would be unwise to accept that offering because it's just rumors. It's just people slandering this individual. If you're going to choose to reject that offering, you would need to know with 100% certainty with your own direct independent verification that this offering was acquired through causing harm. And if that's the case, you would be wise to not accept that offering. So you need to be sure that your mind's not clinging to any perception and you're not just clinging to any kind of rumors or slander or gossip that's being shared. So it's helpful to ensure that you look at that. I wouldn't accept an offering if I knew it was made based on harming other beings, but I would need to know that with 100% certainty. It wouldn't just be a perception.
Would that not kind of go against like accepting what is given and also letting the donor achieve some kind of better mental state by giving the offering and having it purified?
You need to understand that all the teachings of the Buddha, they're not black and white. It's not always accept an offering, always accept what is given. The Buddha is teaching you to move to this higher consciousness, this higher mental state where you're using discernment. Discernment is wise decision making. So while the precept says accepting what is given, and that's generally what you're practicing, are you going to accept what is given if someone gives you cocaine or heroin or crystal methamphetamine? No, you're not going to accept that. That's unwise. Or if someone stole a car and gave it to you as a gift, are you going to accept that gift? No, you're not going to accept it. So you should never look at the teachings of the Buddha as black and white, or always do it this way, or never do it this way, because that would be permanence. And you're learning and understanding the universal truth of impermanence, and you need to be able to move to this higher consciousness where you look at the variables of any given situation and decide what's wise or unwise. So generally, you're accepting what is given. But if you have information that an offering has caused harm, the person acquired this thing through causing harm, you would be unwise to accept that. Or if the offering itself is like drugs or alcohol or weapons or, something stolen or something like that, it would be unwise to accept that because this individual has now caused harm. And if you accept that, now they're going to go do that again in order to give you this gift. So you always need to be able to look at all the variables involved in any given situation, and with your higher consciousness, think through what would be wise or unwise in any given situation.
So how would a person who's like a mafia, deals in drugs and stuff, be able to practice generosity and move to a higher conscious state if people knew that he was people knew that he was doing unwholesome stuff and not accept his generosity? I guess maybe that's what's black and white, but just for example's sake, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they need to practice generosity to ensure that they're moving to a higher conscious state. But then people are not accepting it because, they knew he's a drug lord. It's like somebody who's he's been in prison and they would like to start a new life, but then nobody's giving them a job because they knew they're in prison. So it kind of makes a situation where they're not able to move forward in life.
Well, remember, generosity is more than just giving of financial resources. You can share your time, effort, energy, or resources with others. It doesn't require you to necessarily share money, right? And that individual who's in the mafia, if they're interested in getting to enlightenment, they're going to need to get out of the mafia. They're not going to be able to get to enlightenment as long as they're doing those unwise things as part of the mafia. So they have many changes and modifications that they're going to need to make to their life. They're not going to be able to stay in the mafia, continuing to do harm and get to enlightenment as well.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, it looks like Alicia has a question. Alicia, I've been pronouncing your name wrong. So she's got a question here on Facebook. What about people who has some traits of moral conduct or moral speech, practice generosity, but not aware of the teaching of the Buddha? What is the impact? How is the benefits? Is there purification? What about children that also are not aware of the teachings of the Buddha. So anytime you're practicing generosity, as you see even with an animal, there's benefits there, right? That an individual is experiencing the benefits of training their mind to let go. But if you have an unwholesome moral character, it means that you haven't cultivated the wisdom of how to improve your moral conduct. So one of the things that generosity directed towards the community, or one of the people in one of the 4 stages of enlightenment, is helping you to be able to do, is cultivate the wisdom to be able to improve your moral conduct. So that would be where the most benefit is occurring, is by having cultivated that wisdom and now practicing wholesome moral conduct. So if an individual doesn't have awareness of that, and they're practicing generosity, it's still benefiting their mind to a certain degree, that they're training to let go and give and share, but it's not the same level of benefit as if they had learned the wisdom of how to practice good, wholesome moral conduct. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's go to this next one. This is chapter 146. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
The rare appearance of 5 treasures. Lichavis, the appearance of 5 treasures is rare in the world. What 5? The appearance of a Tathagata, an Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, is rare in the world. A person who can teach the teachings and discipline proclaimed by a Tathagata is rare in the world. When the teachings and discipline proclaimed by a Tathagata has been taught, a person who can understand it is rare in the world. When the teaching and discipline proclaimed by a Tathagata has been taught, a person who can understand it and practice it in accordance with the teachings is rare in the world. A grateful and thankful person is rare in the world. Lichavis, the appearance of these 5 treasures, is rare in the world.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here the Buddha is talking about 5 things that are rare to experience in the world. This first one, he's talking about a Buddha, that a Buddha existing in the world is very rare. And this is helpful for you to be able to see in the original words of the Buddha, because there's some people that will tell you that everybody in the world is a Buddha. And this isn't true. This isn't what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that it's very rare for a Buddha to exist in the world. The last one that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. And there's those 3 criteria that I share with you guys that are the primary criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. Is that they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings, and countless people will get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. Then they will preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. So these are the 3 primary criteria of what make a Buddha, and that's very rare to exist in the world. And that's what the Buddha is explaining to you here. And then a person who can actually share his teachings as he taught them, as proclaimed by the Tathagata, is very rare in the world, because it would take somebody to be able to progress closer and closer to enlightenment, to be able to understand the teachings and then be able to then teach them. Because there's people getting to enlightenment, which is an enlightened being, but whether they actually have the capability to teach them is rare, because every enlightened being isn't going to be a teacher. There'll be enlightened beings who are politicians or taxi drivers or entrepreneurs or retired individuals or what have you. There'll be plenty of different people performing different roles, but not everyone's going to have the ability to teach. So it's very rare for someone to be able to teach the teachings in the way that a Buddha has taught them. Then, once the teachings are actually taught, it's very rare for an individual to understand them, right? Like me at the temple, I can be teaching 60, 80, 100 people at a time, and there's maybe like 2 or 3 people that are really taking it super serious. And there might be kind of another group of people who are somewhat understanding the teachings, but they're not going to take action to actually improve the condition of the mind, because the mind's holding on and it's complacent and it's not interested in implementing this change. So a person that really understands the teachings of the Buddha is very rare. Sometimes students come here to Thailand and they learn with me, and they're deeply learning the teachings, and they're surprised how people come and go in and out of the classes. But this is helping you to understand why that is because people have difficulties to understand, because the mind is holding on. It's deeply stuck into this unknowing of true reality and this ignorance, and it's unwilling to be able to take in new information, to be able to then do something with it and improve. So the whole thing where we understand the unenlightened mind craves permanence, another way to say that is it does not like impermanence. It doesn't like change. So right away, when somebody first starts learning about the path to enlightenment, we're talking about change. We're like, hey, this being is unenlightened. In order to get to this better way of life, you're going to need to change. And the unenlightened mind doesn't want that. The unenlightened mind craves permanence. It's holding on. Even as dark as this darkness is even as uncomfortable as the anger and the hatred and the broken relationships and misery and frustration is, this individual just doesn't want to change, right? They may not even understand what is needed to change. So this is very rare for an individual to understand the teachings and to then practice the teachings, because once again, it's very challenging for the unenlightened mind to be willing to let go of what it currently thinks it understands about the world to then be able to experience something different. So not only is it rare for someone to understand the teachings, but it's very rare for someone to then practice the teachings in accordance to the way that the Buddha actually taught them. So then ultimately the Buddha is saying it's very rare for someone to be grateful and thankful. And you might see this in your life just generally, when you go to a store and you open the door for someone, it's very rare for somebody to maybe say thank you. But of course, that's not why you're opening the door. That's not why you're holding the door. You're doing it in order to practice generosity and enhance the quality of your mind, not because you want or you desire or you expect someone to be thankful and grateful. But it's very rare for someone to be grateful and thankful. So these are the 5 rare appearances of the 5 treasures, and the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that, and you can independently verify these things through spending time around the Buddhist world and in the world itself. You can see these things are very rare. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. I guess I have a question about the second one, the person who can teach the teachings and discipline proclaimed by Tathagata everywhere in the world. I guess the question is around, I don't know if there are plenty of teachers, but there are many people who are teaching, at least the one I see on YouTube, and maybe the others are teaching as well. Would you say that the people are teaching in the teaching and the discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata, or is that, would you not consider that?
I haven't seen anybody in the Western world who is teaching based on the original words of the Buddha in a way that would lead to enlightenment. I haven't seen that. I've seen Thai people here in Thailand, and they do have some YouTube channels too, that are teaching in a way that leads people to enlightenment. But it's very rare to see that even here in Thailand. Thai people, these teachings have been here for 800 to 1200 years. It's very rare to see people that are actually teaching the actual true teachings of the original words of the Buddha. So this is rare in the world. Like during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was rare. After he died, it's rare. And even today, it's rare for someone to teach in the way that the Buddha actually taught.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And by the way that a person comes to that understanding, to know that, is if you have trained your mind to be able to get to this enlightened mental state where the mind's completely peaceful and joyful, and your mind's in that mental state, you've attained what's called final knowledge. This is where the Buddha talks about you fully understand the path to enlightenment. And the way that you have confirmation that that has occurred is through the condition of your own mind. That when it's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and you see that your mind is completely peaceful and joyful, you'll know that you fully understand the path to enlightenment, because you wouldn't be able to get to that mental state otherwise. And then when you understand what it takes to get to that mental state, when you see other people teaching what it is that they're teaching, you'll know that these teachings don't lead to enlightenment, or these teachings do lead to enlightenment, because you know what it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. But as an enlightened being, as a person who's sharing the teachings, you're not interested in going out into the world and telling other people what will or will not lead to enlightenment, in terms of judging other people and saying this teacher's teachings don't lead to enlightenment, that teacher's teachings don't lead to enlightenment. That's not your goal, to go out into the world and do that. But as a teacher, if someone asks you a question like you just asked me, an individual can determine and know who's teaching in a way that would actually lead to enlightenment. So that's how you are able to determine that for yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the next one, which is chapter 147. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, go ahead, Vibhav.
A helpful person. That is so, Ananda, that is so. When one person, owing to another, has gone for refuge to the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, I say that it is not easy for the former to repay the latter by paying homage, respect to him, rising up for him, according him with respectful salutation and polite services, and by providing robes, alms food, resting places, and medical supplies. When one person, owing to another, has come to abstain from killing living beings, from taking what is not given, from misconduct and sensual pleasures, from false speech, and from liquor, wine, and intoxicants, substances that cause heedlessness, which are the basis of heedlessness, I say that it is not easy for the former to repay the latter by paying homage, respect to him, rising up for him, according to him respectful salutation and polite services, and by providing robes, alms food, resting places, and medicine supplies. When one person, owing to another, has come to possess unwavering confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, and to possess the virtues praised by noble ones, I say that it is not easy for the former to repay the latter by paying homage, respect to him, rising up for him, according to him respectful salutation and polite services, and by providing robes, alms food, resting places, and medicine supplies. When one person, owing to another, has become free from doubt, from discontentedness, about the cause of discontentedness, about the elimination of discontentedness, and about the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness, I say that it is not easy for the former to repay the latter by paying homage, respect to him, rising up for him, according in respectful salutation and polite services, and by providing robes, alms food, resting places, and medicinal supplies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So the very best thing that you could ever do for another person is to provide them the gift of the teachings, sharing the teachings, assistance in the teachings. But you would only do that if somebody was interested in that help. But that's the very best thing that you could ever give to somebody. You know, giving somebody a material object like a car or a house or money or things like this, those things are all impermanent, right? Clothes, jewelry, food, things like that. Those things are all impermanent. But giving the wisdom of what it takes to be able to train the mind and understand this natural law of karma, getting to the point where you have wisdom to be able to make wise decisions, this is like an immeasurable amount of benefit that you could ever give to somebody else. And of course, that person would need to request that from you. So what the Buddha is saying here is that if one person benefits from the ability of another person to be able to give you these kinds of things, that it's impossible for you to repay that person for that gift of the teachings. And he's going through all the different things, like being able to gain the wisdom of all these different things. The first one, he talks about refuge in the Buddha, the teachings in the community. Refuge is protection. If an individual basically helps you to build confidence in the Buddha, the teachings in the community, and helps you to be able to see that this is the way forward in life, that if there's a person who has done that with you and helped you to be able to gain that ability to learn and grow and develop in this path, then the Buddha is saying you can't repay that person enough. And then if an individual has helped you to gain the wisdom of how unwise it is to practice any of these things and be able to get to the point where you understand that killing and stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, taking substances that cause heedlessness is unwise, the Buddha is saying that it's not easy for you to repay that individual for having gained that wisdom. Because now by you choosing not to do those things, it's going to produce an incalculable amount of benefit for you all throughout the rest of your life, because you're choosing not to do those things, and now you're going to be able to experience all this benefit. And then the same thing with the confidence in the Buddha, the teachings in the community, the moral conduct, learning that, same thing. And then ultimately he talks about becoming free from doubt about the Four Noble Truths. That's what he's talking about here. If somebody's helped you to be able to learn the Four Noble Truths, this is where you can have a real breakthrough to be able to understand the path to enlightenment. And he's saying it would be, very difficult for you to be able to repay this individual for having shared that wisdom with you to be able to help you. So this is the Buddha just helping you to understand how beneficial the wisdom of the path to enlightenment is, and how anybody who's helping you on the path, it would be very challenging to repay this person for that benefit. And not that you should aim to repay this person, because anybody who's sharing the teachings with you wouldn't look at it as, hey, I'm doing this for you, so I want this back from you. If anybody's sharing the teachings with you, they should be doing that without any expectation of anything in return. But the Buddha is essentially teaching you to have politeness and kindness and respect for anybody who's helping you to be able to progress in life and learning these teachings. And while you may practice generosity with those people, it's important that you understand that this wisdom to improve your life is very challenging to be able to ever repay that because it's so impactful and transformative in one's life. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just had a small question on the second paragraph. So it talks about the 5 precepts, but it's kind of extended from being sexual misconduct to like, seems like it's all sensual pleasures. I don't know if there's a reason for that.
Yeah, so misconduct in sensual pleasures is sexual misconduct, but there's other misconduct that you can have based on sensual pleasures. There's various things that you could potentially be longing, yearning, and craving for with sensual desire, and now that leads you to having unwise moral conduct. But this misconduct in sensual pleasures is typically referring to sexual misconduct.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, I don't see anything from Alicia. All right, so let's go to the last chapter of this book, chapter 148. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
This holy life is lived for the abandoning of existence. This world is burning. Harmed by contact, it calls disease a self. By whatever means it understands, it becomes otherwise than that. Becoming otherwise, the world is attached to becoming harmed by existence, and yet has excitement in that very existence. Where there's excitement, there is fear. What one fears is stressful. This holy life is lived for the abandoning of existence. Whatever ascetics or Brahmins say that liberation from existence is by means of existence, all of them are not released from existence, I say. And whenever ascetics and Brahmins say that escape from existence is by means of non-existence, all of them have not escaped from existence, I say. For this stress comes into play in dependence on every gain of material possessions. With the ending of every craving or desire, there's no stress coming into play. Look at this world. Beings afflicted with thick ignorance are unreleased from passion for what has come to be. All levels of existence anywhere in any way are impermanent, stressful, subject to change. Seeing this as it's come to be with right wisdom, one abandons craving for existence and doesn't have excitement in non-existence. From the total ending of craving comes fading and elimination without remainder, liberation or enlightenment. For the monk who is liberated through lack of craving and desire, there's no further existence. He has conquered Mara, won the battle, having gone beyond existences such.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So this is an interesting discourse here at the very end of this book, The Realms of Existence, because the ultimate goal of training your mind and getting to enlightenment, experiencing that peace and joy, having done that, you will also no longer experience existence in the cycle of rebirth, that this is the last life, that you're not going to be coming back to experience over and over and over again the difficulties and struggles of existing in the world. So the Buddha here is saying the world is burning. This is why he refers to the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots or the 3 fires of craving, anger, and ignorance, that the world is burning, meaning individual minds in the unenlightened state, it's burning with craving, anger, and ignorance. Then an individual experiencing contact through the 6 sense bases, an individual experiences harm within their own mind because of that craving, anger, and ignorance. An individual experiences this harm, these painful feelings. And this self or this personal existence view that an individual clings to in the unenlightened state, we can call this a disease where the mind is holding on and clinging to a self. And now, whatever means it understands anything, it becomes otherwise than that, meaning that becoming otherwise, the world is now attached to becoming harmed by existence, yet has excitement in that very existence. So in other words, the mind is clinging and craving and holding on to this existence, But yet it experiences this harm in this existence. Individuals really crave and cling and hold on to existing in this world, but yet with their mind polluted, they're experiencing all these harms. So they get excited in this existence, but yet they might be having a certain level of misery or despair in their existence. But that's not what an enlightened being is experiencing. But that's what the unenlightened mind does, is it holds on to this world with this excitement, but yet it's experiencing this constant harm and difficulties and miseries. So ultimately what a Buddha is helping you to be able to see is to be able to let go of this world and move on so that you can get to the point where your mind's completely peaceful and joyful. Where there's excitement, there's fear. What he's saying here is that if you allow your mind to get conditioned pleasant feelings, ultimately he talks about material possessions, then there's going to be fear. So for example, if you get a brand new mobile phone and you're so excited, or you get that brand new car and you're so excited about that brand new car or that brand new mobile phone, well, now that excitement is based on the condition of getting that new car, that new mobile phone. And now there's going to be fear because you're afraid someone's going to scratch it, or you're going to lose it, or someone's going to steal it, or something like this. So wherever there's excitement, wherever there's conditioned pleasant feelings, there's fear. If you're really excited to go on this new trip and take this vacation somewhere, well, then there's fear that maybe the plane will get canceled or you won't be able to go. Right? So wherever you allow the mind to get conditioned pleasant feelings, then the painful ones are waiting right around the corner for you. What one fears, they experience stress, right? As you're leading up to that trip, or you have that mobile phone and you leave it at a restaurant, now you're stressful when you have to hurry up and go back and you try to get that phone that you left at the restaurant, right? So that's where all of this is coming from, is craving, desire, attachment. That's what's producing the conditioned pleasant feelings of excitement, and that's what's producing the fear and the stress as well. The holy life, or this path to enlightenment, is for abandoning existence, getting to the point where you let go and you're no longer craving and clinging and holding on to the world. Whatever ascetic or Brahmin say that liberation from existence is by means of existence, they're not released from existence, meaning they haven't got to enlightenment. They haven't escaped the cycle of rebirth. Because sometimes you'll hear people even today say that the way to get moving on this path and actually experience enlightenment is to come back into the world and experience existence over and over and over again. They have certain ways of referring to this. They call it a bodhisattva, that this person's going to keep coming back into the world over and over and over again, helping other people to get to enlightenment. And what the Buddha is saying is that if you see liberation from existence as you would like to continue to exist in the world, you are not actually free from existence. You aren't liberated. Your mind is not yet enlightened. Whatever ascetic or Brahmin say the escape from existence is by means of non-existence, is not existing at all, then the Buddha is saying they haven't escaped existence either. They haven't gotten to enlightenment. Because sometimes when you talk to people, you will hear them say that getting to enlightenment is to no longer exist in the world. And this isn't true. So anybody who's craving existence or craving non-existence, they're not actually enlightened. They're not actually liberated. They haven't escaped from existence. For the stress comes into play in dependence on every material gain of possessions. So if you cling to your material possessions, that's where the excitement's going to come, and then the fear and the stress. So you need to understand that you're going to have material possessions, but not clinging to them, because as long as you cling to them, that's what's going to produce the discontentedness. And that's why the Buddha says here that with the ending of every craving, there's no stress coming into play, so that you can have material possessions, but you're not craving and clinging to them. So now look at this world. Beings afflicted with thick ignorance are unreleased from passion for what has come to be, right? So with this lack of wisdom, individuals continue to have this craving, this longing, yearning, this holding on to material possessions. All levels of existence anywhere in any way are impermanent, stressful, subject to change. This is what the wisdom of the path to enlightenment helps you to be able to understand, that if you cling to impermanent things, wanting them to be permanent, then that's going to be very stressful because they're all subject to change. So you would like to not cling to any existence and any realm, whether it's this human realm or any other realm, get to the point where you let go of all of that. Seeing this as it's come to be with right wisdom, meaning you truly understand the truth, one abandons craving for existence, that you no longer have this craving to exist in the world, but you also don't have excitement in non-existence either. In other words, in the present moment, your mind's completely peaceful, completely joyful. You're content and satisfied in the present moment. If you're craving for continued existence, or you're excited in non-existence, then that means your mind's still longing, yearning for something else outside of what's currently happening right now, which is this being is in existence. So if you eliminate the craving for existence and the craving or excitement for non-existence, then your mind can come to peace and joy in the present moment. And that's what the Buddha is saying here. From the total ending of craving comes fading and elimination without remainder, liberation or enlightenment. That's getting to the middle where you're not craving existence, but you're not excited about non-existence either. You're just in the present moment, being content and peaceful and satisfied and joyful. For the monk who is liberated through lack of craving desire, there's no further existence. There's not going to be a future existence in this cycle of rebirth. And this individual has conquered Mara, or this being who's interested in seeing calamity and unwholesome things happening in the world. You've won the battle within your own mind. That's what you're really working towards achieving, is eliminating that battle of those constant thoughts that are taking you in an unwholesome direction. Having gone beyond existences, meaning you've escaped out of this cycle of rebirth. And then when he says such, it means like, let it be known, or this is the truth. That's what he means by that. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I have a question on the second and the third sentence. So saying harm by contact, it calls disease a self. I don't understand the disease. What is the disease here? Or is self a disease or disease is a self?
The disease is the mind holding on to personal existence view and thinking that there is a self here. That's a disease.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then says, by whatever means it understands anything, it becomes otherwise than that. So it's saying that whatever somebody understands, the mind is something else? Or
by understanding the wisdom of the path to enlightenment, you understand to eliminate this idea that there is a self in the mind. So by whatever means it understands anything, by whatever means you cultivate the wisdom of anything, it becomes otherwise than that. So this disease, that there is a self there, it becomes otherwise, meaning that you understand that that's not the true case, that there isn't truly a self there. So through the cultivation of wisdom, you become aware that there really is no self, and this disease can be eradicated from the mind.
Okay, but then this basically saying, it says that it becomes otherwise, then it is, the world is attached to becoming harmed by existence.
Mm-hmm.
So this seems to say that becoming otherwise is not understanding by the wisdom.
Becoming otherwise, the world is attached to becoming harmed by existence and yet has excitement in existence, right? So becoming otherwise here, up here where we're talking, is that the mind understands that this disease is that we refer to as a self is not truly existence, that it's not truly there, but the mind is just clinging to it as thinking that this is there. And then this is where the mind becomes harmed by having that personal existence view in the mind.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see if we have any.
Can I ask a question? Like, can I?
Okay.
Can sit down after the class?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can help you after class. Looks like Alicia has a question here. She says, if someone talks about their suffering, their problems, and asks for my opinion, or not directly, but is talking about it to discuss it, I can find myself wanting to talk about the teaching of the Buddha without mentioning it, or sometimes mentioning the source. Do you have any thoughts about how to help others if they don't show any high interest about the teachings of the Buddha, but not close to the direct benefits of it? I just don't want to force my opinion or advice on others. So what you would normally like to do is make sure there's an open door for you to be able to share. Because if you're giving unsolicited guidance, this would be coming from one's own craving and also the conceit in the mind. You would like to get to a point where you might hear somebody who's complaining about life and how miserable things are, and then they stop and you say, well, are you interested in my thoughts on that? Or would you like help with that? Or is that something you're interested in understanding my thoughts to be able to help you? And they're either going to say yes or no. And they might say no, they're not interested. And if you don't have a craving, desire, attachment there, you can be peaceful and joyful and just move on in the conversation. But if they say, yes, I am interested in your opinion, it would be unwise to get excited in that situation, because that would be your craving that's producing that. Because even as you start sharing what would be helpful for them, you can be 30 seconds, a minute, or 2 minutes into your conversation and sharing what it is that you're sharing, and their ego kicks in. And they're not truly interested in what it is that you have to share. They might have said, yes, I'm interested, but they're not really interested and they kick out. They're trying to basically kick you away, right? So you need to be prepared for that situation too. Whereas if their ego starts rising up and they start jumping in and interrupting you and they're showing that they're not truly interested in what you have to say, it's just change the subject and move on to something else perhaps. But rarely there are situations where people are going to be interested in what you have to say. And now you can share it with them and it can be helpful for them. But as you saw from the rare treasures, the appearance of those rare treasures, someone being thankful and having gratitude for that is very rare. So you shouldn't expect that either. That if you're sharing without any expectation of anything in return, but you would like to do it with an open door. And sometimes people have that open door and sometimes they don't. And if you've asked once or twice or maybe 3 times over the course of multiple months and they're just not interested, then it's best for you to just not even share. Right? Because an individual that becomes more and more wise to the teachings of the Buddha, you're going to see so many people struggling in the world. And if you went around trying to help every single person and those people aren't really interested in your help, you're just going to be wasting your time. And it's going to be your own craving and conceit that would be trying to step in to do that. So you would like to be able to selectively help people who are open to your help and your guidance, and then doing that in a respectful and polite way, making sure there's an open door. And then be prepared that even if they say yes, they're interested in your guidance, their ego can kick in and they're really not interested. So early on in an individual's practice, I suggest you just really focus on developing your own mind and developing your own wisdom. And then over time, as you become more skillful with right intention, right speech, and right action, you can help certain people that might be interested in that help. And you'll need to learn how to do that skillfully so that you're not damaging your relationships. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do here is just end our class like I typically do by thanking all of you guys for joining. Appreciative that you're interested in learning and growing on the path to enlightenment. Next week, we're going to be in the next book, Volume 12, which is titled Lowly Arts. We're going to be in chapters 1 through 10. So if you'd like to download that or go print it or get a printed version at the temple or through Amazon, you can do that and you'll be able to gradually learn in Volume 12. Because over the next several weeks, we're going to actually be finishing up this Pali Canon and English study group. We're going to go all the way through the end of the year, and it's going to restart in January. Not that anybody needs to start at the beginning, but it's actually going to restart in January. So we're going to be coming to a close of the entire program for this iteration of it. And if you'd like to continue to study volumes 12 and 13, we're going to get into other topics because we've been talking about the realms of existence for quite a while now. We're going to be getting into some other topics that are going to really help you in your journey to enlightenment. So if you'd like to study those ahead of time, reading the words of the Buddha and the words that I share, that'll really help you. Tomorrow in the group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 12 of volume 1, which is titled Craving is the Problem. What is the solution? This is where I'm going to be reminding students of the Four Noble Truths, because in Chapter 13, I'm going to teach a technique to actually go in and almost surgically remove your cravings, desires, attachments. And it's important in the middle of the book here that students are reminded about what the true problem is elimination of craving, so that then they can focus on the solution, which is to be able to eliminate cravings, desires, attachments. And in chapter 13, it helps people to understand how to do that through almost surgical means, where the first part of the book is helping you to understand the generalized training, where chapter 13 goes in and teaches you something that can almost surgically remove some of these cravings, desires, attachments, attachments. And then, of course, on Sunday, I'm also going to be doing the Sunday night meditation at the temple at 6:30 p.m. So if you guys are in Chiang Mai, you're welcome to attend that. But it's also being live streamed now, so you can attend it that way as well. And then on Wednesday, I'll be doing meditation with students and opening up to any questions that they have. So thank you all for joining, and perhaps we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Be well and take care. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.